Hi, I'm Angel 38, and I never imagined a single gift could change everything in my marriage. My husband, Mark, the man I trusted with my heart, tossed something I had poured so much thought into straight into the trash, and that moment revealed a side of him I hadn't really seen before. Something I had hidden inside that gift would leave him completely shocked. Tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? And don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories about emotional courage and family drama. It all started on an ordinary Thursday evening. I remember it like it was etched in my mind. Mark and I had spent the day bickering over trivial things, whose turn it was to do the laundry, a forgotten grocery item, a misplaced bill. But this argument escalated faster than usual. I felt a tight knot form in my chest, a familiar tension I'd learned to recognize over years of small resentments. But that evening the air was thicker, heavy with unspoken words and simmering frustration. I had bought a gift for Mark a few days prior. Nothing extravagant, just a small, carefully wrapped package that seemed ordinary enough to hide the true intention behind it. I had spent hours thinking about what to include, something meaningful yet discreet. Not everyone would understand its importance at first glance. I watched him pace the living room, his tie slightly loosened, phone forgotten on the coffee table, and I knew he was stressed. That gave me the moment I'd been waiting for. He flung himself onto the sofa and let out a groan, rolling his eyes at the chaos of our tiny apartment. I tried to smile, holding the gift behind my back, pretending it was just another mundane object. "Mark, I got something for you," I said softly, my voice quieter than usual, almost trembling. He barely looked up, waving his hand dismissively. "Yeah, sure, Angel. Can it wait? I'm kinda busy right now." Something in me shifted. I wasn't going to let this moment slip away. This wasn't about the gift itself. It was about everything that had been building up over months. The late nights when he brushed off my calls, the careless words that stung more than he realized, the invisible weight of being unnoticed in my own home. I took a deep breath and set the gift on the coffee table. "No, I think you should open it now." Mark's brow furrowed, and for a moment, I thought he might actually resist. But curiosity, or perhaps the need to assert control, made him lean forward. He tugged at the ribbon, tore the paper carelessly, and then laughed. "Seriously? You spent time on this? I don't even know what it is." His tone was sharp, dismissive, and my stomach twisted with a mix of anger and anticipation. I had hidden something inside that gift, something he would never expect. It wasn't valuable in a conventional sense, not something shiny or expensive. It was a piece of my truth, a record of his careless betrayals, little by little over months, tucked neatly into this small package. I watched him grin, still unaware, still oblivious to the significance of the moment. And then, as if the universe conspired against me, he did it. He tossed the gift aside, straight into the trash can by the sofa, with that careless, unthinking gesture that said everything about how he viewed me, or maybe how he didn't. My heart lurched, and for a second I felt dizzy with disbelief. Everything inside me screamed. How could he not see? How could he be so blind to what I had poured into that tiny box? I didn't react immediately. I just stood there, hands trembling slightly, watching him sink into the sofa cushions as if nothing had happened. And in that silence, the world seemed to pause for a heartbeat. I knew in that instant that things could never go back to the way they were. That gift had been a test, a small mirror of all the tiny frustrations I had bottled up inside. And he had thrown it away without a second thought. I remember the smell of the room, the faint aroma of his aftershave mixed with the lingering scent of coffee from the morning. I remember the sunlight fading through the blinds, casting long shadows across the floor. I remember feeling a strange calm amidst the storm of anger building inside me. This wasn't just about a gift being thrown away. It was about recognition. It was about the realization that someone I loved could be so blind to my heart. For a few minutes I simply sat on the edge of the armchair, pretending to scroll on my phone while I watched him. He was muttering under his breath about bills, about dinner, about some minor inconvenience at work, completely unaware that he had just set off something much bigger. That small gesture, throwing away the gift, had sparked a fire inside me, one I had been holding back for far too long. Then I remembered a small incident from weeks ago. I had casually mentioned a quiet disappointment in our marriage, a missed anniversary, a forgotten promise, a tiny lie he thought I wouldn't notice. He had laughed it off, told me I was overthinking, and walked away. At the time I had smiled politely, said nothing, and let it go. But now, holding my emotions in check, I realized that moment had been the first layer of this slow-burning fire. The gift was the final spark. I glanced at the trash can where the gift now sat, and a thought crossed my mind. A dangerous, intoxicating thought. What if he actually understood, finally, what he had thrown away? What if that careless act could lead to something he never anticipated? My mind raced with possibilities. I could confront him immediately, let him see my fury, or I could wait, letting the impact build, letting the shock settle in slowly. Mark, oblivious to the storm brewing, finally noticed my silence. "Angel? Are you okay? You've been quiet for like ever." His tone carried a hint of irritation now, just a little prick of concern, and I realized how completely unaware he was of the emotional landmine he had just stepped on. I forced a small, calm smile, one that didn't betray the maelstrom inside me. "I'm fine," I said softly, letting the words hang in the air like smoke, but inside I was not fine. Not at all. My mind went over every detail I had hidden in that gift. The notes, the letters, the evidence of small betrayals, the intimate truth of how his actions had hurt me. Each piece had been carefully curated, each word deliberate, each memory stored to speak volumes when the time was right. And now it was sitting in the trash, discarded without a thought, just as I feared, but also just as I had planned. As I sat there, my thoughts began to untangle themselves. The discarded gift became more than just a symbol of disregard. It became a map of his own blindness, a mirror of everything he had ignored in our life together. I thought about how many times I had tried to talk to him, to make him see, only to be brushed aside. And yet, I realized this moment the throwing away of the gift was exactly the kind of catalyst that could change everything. A small incident reminded me of its potential. Earlier that week, Mark had been bragging to a coworker about his easy life, claiming he didn't have to worry about little things because I handled everything perfectly. The arrogance, the overconfidence, it had frustrated me then, but now it fueled the possibility of this hidden truth having maximum impact. If he thought he could keep ignoring my feelings, he was about to learn how wrong he was. I took a slow breath and decided to leave the room, letting him stew in his own oblivion. I could hear him muttering under his breath, sitting there, thinking he had just discarded a meaningless item. Little did he know that tiny, insignificant-seeming gift contained everything he had never truly noticed, a reflection of every missed opportunity to love, respect, and cherish the person sitting right beside him. And as I walked to the kitchen, the sunlight catching the edge of the trash can where the gift rested, I felt a strange sense of anticipation. I didn't know exactly how or when he would find out, but I knew it would be unforgettable. I knew the moment he discovered the hidden contents would spark a chain of events we could never go back from. In that instant I realized something else too. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about being seen, about finally making my feelings, my truth, my voice impossible to ignore. The gift that he thought was disposable had become my secret weapon, and the moment it had been thrown away had ignited something inside me I couldn't suppress. The evening continued around us, dinner preparations, the clatter of dishes, the faint hum of a sitcom on the television, but inside a storm had begun. And all of it had started with a single, ordinary-looking gift. As I stood in the kitchen, letting the clatter of dinner preparations mask the storm inside me, my mind kept drifting back to the gift, now sitting in the trash, oblivious to Mark's careless eyes. But the truth about it, what I had hidden inside, was heavier than any physical object. I had poured months of observation, heartbreak, and quiet documentation into that small package. Every folded note, every letter, every tiny recording was a testament to the side of our marriage he never bothered to see. The first layer of what I had hidden was a series of letters I had written to myself over the past year. Not the kind of letters you send, but the kind you write in secret when your heart is full and your mind refuses to speak aloud. Each page detailed the small betrayals, the words that cut sharper than a blade, and the quiet disappointments I had endured silently. I wrote about moments when he laughed at my ideas in front of friends, when he dismissed my feelings about money, when he assumed I would just handle everything without acknowledgement. I remember one particular page where I recounted a night last summer. We had been invited to a small neighborhood barbecue, and I had spent hours preparing a dish I knew he loved. He barely looked at it, chatting animatedly with our neighbors while I carried plates and refilled drinks, and at one point he muttered, "You really overdo it sometimes, Angel." I scribbled the memory into my secret journal, not just to remember, but to crystallize my feelings, to make them undeniable. Every word, every emotion was carefully preserved, and that page now rested inside the gift he had tossed aside. The second layer of my hidden truths was a voice recording. I had a small digital recorder I used occasionally, capturing my thoughts aloud, almost like talking to a therapist I didn't have. In this recording, I spoke about the subtle ways he had undermined me over the months. I detailed conversations where he had made promises he didn't keep, moments when he subtly shifted blame onto me, and times when he had dismissed my emotional needs. Listening to the playback, my voice trembled, raw with both sadness and quiet fury. That tremor, that mix of pain and strength, now waited in the small discarded package to reveal itself in a moment of shocking clarity. The third element was a series of photos I had secretly taken, not meant to shame him, not meant to accuse, but to show patterns I had been noticing for months. A snapshot of his hand hovering over his phone, reading messages late at night. Another of him laughing at a party while ignoring my presence. Another of the stack of bills he had left untouched while he played video games. These images, mundane to anyone else, were evidence to me of a pattern I had lived with silently, patterns that finally demanded acknowledgement. As I thought about these hidden truths, I remembered the precise moment I had decided to put them into the gift. I had wrapped the letters carefully, folding them so that only someone who truly looked inside would notice their presence. I had added the small recorder in a tiny envelope, taped to the bottom, disguised as nothing more than padding. The photos were tucked between the folds of tissue paper, seemingly inconspicuous. It wasn't malicious, it was a careful preservation of the reality he refused to see, an unspoken mirror held up to his negligence. I walked over to the window and looked outside at the quiet street. The evening had settled in, and the faint sounds of distant traffic mixed with the hum of our refrigerator. I thought about the irony, how something so ordinary, so everyday could hold a truth so powerful. Mark had no idea that the gift he treated as disposable contained the accumulated weight of months of unseen frustration, the chronicles of emotional labor he had never acknowledged. And as I stared at the dim glow outside, a small unsettling thrill ran through me. One day soon he would see it. A minor incident from earlier that week came to mind. I had casually mentioned to a neighbor that I was thinking of organizing some old paperwork and keepsakes. She had remarked how meticulous I was, and how Mark was often too busy to notice the little things. I smiled politely, but internally I realized it was a subtle foreshadowing. I had already been taking small steps to document everything, quietly building the case of truth that now rested in the trash. My meticulous nature, often a source of mild annoyance to Mark, had become my hidden strength. I remembered the afternoon I had taken a long walk through our neighborhood park, carrying the gift with me while deciding exactly how to package it. I had chosen a neutral wrapping paper, soft and unassuming, so that the contents wouldn't reveal themselves too easily. I wanted it to look like an ordinary token of thoughtfulness, not something that could carry the weight of months of ignored emotions. I had walked past joggers, parents with strollers, even a couple walking their dog, all the while imagining the moment he would finally uncover it. My heart had pounded with a mixture of anticipation and apprehension, excitement and fear. Returning home that evening, I had slipped it under the couch cushions, carefully hidden among magazines and remote controls. Mark had barely glanced at it over the next few days as usual, distracted by his routines, work emails, and casual games on his phone. That day of placement had felt almost ceremonial, a quiet acknowledgement of the private power I now held. It wasn't revenge yet, it was preparation. And yet, the moment he had tossed it aside, I realized the timing of its revelation was in my hands. The hidden truths also included my personal reflections, written not just to document his oversights, but to understand my own feelings. I had poured my anxieties, my moments of weakness, my longing for acknowledgement, into those letters. Reading them again, I realized how much I had grown. I wasn't just angry. I was observant, patient, strategic, and resilient. The gift was not simply a mirror for him. It was a testament to my own journey of recognizing my worth, my voice, and my capacity to hold space for my emotions, even when ignored. A small, almost mundane event kept replaying in my mind, The time I had asked Mark to help fix a leaky faucet, and he had grumbled about being too tired, shrugging it off. I had done it myself, silently counting each moment of dismissiveness. Each memory was catalogued, each emotion preserved in my hidden collection. These everyday betrayals were often invisible, but together, they formed a pattern that could no longer be ignored. I felt the weight of these hidden truths in my chest. They were a mixture of sadness and quiet power. Sadness because it took me months to even acknowledge that my feelings were being overlooked. Power because finally I had something tangible to make him understand. I had transformed my pain into clarity, my silence into a message that could not be ignored. Even the way I had hidden the letters and recordings had been deliberate. I had made sure the packaging was subtle, nothing flashy, nothing that screamed important. I wanted the revelation to be organic, to hit him in the quietest moment of his day. The impact would be amplified by the contrast. What he assumed was meaningless would reveal everything he had ignored. And in that quiet kitchen I realized another truth. This gift, now resting in the trash, was no longer just an object. It had become a symbol of every time I had been unseen, unheard, or dismissed. Each page, each recording, each photo was a reminder that emotional labor, patience, and attention to detail mattered, even if he had never noticed. And the power of seeing someone's care ignored was sharp, like a sudden chill running down your spine. I remembered the nights I had stayed up writing, listening to the quiet hum of the city outside, capturing my thoughts while Mark slept peacefully beside me, oblivious. Those nights had been my sanctuary, my preparation, my quiet rebellion. Each entry, each recording, each snapshot was a seed I had planted, and now, even in the trash, it awaited its moment to bloom. The strange satisfaction of knowing I had documented everything carefully was tempered by a simmering tension. What would happen when he finally realized? Would he be defensive, ashamed, confused? The anticipation was electric. I had built a foundation of truth so undeniable that denial would be impossible. And yet, I had no desire to humiliate him publicly. This was about acknowledgement, awareness, and finally leveling the emotional balance. A minor, almost comical memory flitted through my mind. Mark once laughed when I suggested we organize old receipts to track spending. Why bother, Angel? You worry too much. At the time I had laughed along, but secretly I had started compiling a small record of patterns, habits, and small betrayals. That seemingly insignificant act of overthinking had now become the very tool that would deliver a profound revelation. And so in the kitchen, surrounded by the ordinary noises of our home, I felt the power of these hidden truths settle within me. They were a testament to patience, resilience, and quiet strategy. The gift might have been discarded, but the truths it contained were alive, waiting, and undeniably potent. The moment of revelation was coming, and when it arrived, the weight of months of unnoticed emotions would finally make itself known. After the gift had been discarded, I thought the matter would fade, that perhaps its significance would vanish along with it. But life, as it often does, has a way of making even the smallest gestures ripple outward in ways you can't immediately predict. The hidden truths I had tucked inside that gift began working quietly, unseen, shaping subtle shifts in Mark's behavior and the atmosphere of our home. At first, the changes were almost imperceptible. I noticed him pausing slightly longer at the kitchen table, rifling through his morning emails with attention I hadn't seen before. His forehead creased more often, and his eyes darted around the apartment like he was searching for something. I watched him from the doorway, pretending to be absorbed in folding laundry, but my chest tightened with quiet anticipation. It was as if the invisible weight of the gift, and everything inside it, was beginning to exert pressure. One evening he sat on the couch, scrolling through his phone with a distracted look. Normally he would have chuckled at a meme, laughed at a video, or scrolled past messages from friends without a second thought. But that night he seemed different. He paused mid-scroll, muttered a confused, almost bitter-sounding, and tapped his phone screen repeatedly. I recognized the faint tremor in his fingers, a nervous energy that was entirely uncharacteristic of him. I wanted to smile, but I stayed calm, pouring a glass of water while pretending not to notice. Small incidents kept occurring that were almost comical in their subtlety. One morning he picked up a stack of papers from the counter and muttered, "Did I leave this here?" He looked genuinely puzzled, scanning the kitchen for something he couldn't quite name. I held my silence, letting the tension build naturally. It was satisfying in a quiet, almost meditative way, watching him unknowingly react to a truth he hadn't even discovered yet. The impact was there, invisible to the casual observer, but powerful in its effect on him and on me. A few days later, he started double-checking things he had never thought twice about before. Bills were suddenly organized neatly on the counter. Receipts that he had ignored for months were now stacked in careful piles. One evening he muttered, "Angel, have you noticed? I've been keeping track of everything." His tone was hesitant, almost defensive, and I couldn't help but feel a quiet surge of satisfaction. The unseen truths hidden in that discarded gift were slowly forcing him to confront his habits, his negligence, and perhaps, in some small way, his behavior toward me. I noticed an entirely unexpected ripple effect when our neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, dropped by unannounced one afternoon. She commented on the subtle changes she had noticed in our household. "You've been calmer lately, Angel. And Mark, he seems different." I smiled politely, letting her observations land without explanation. She had no idea the discarded gift was at the center of these changes, and yet it had already begun to reshape the emotional climate in our home. Mark's reactions became increasingly unpredictable, a mix of frustration, confusion, and unease. One night I found him standing in the living room, holding a notebook that he didn't normally use. "I don't know why, but I feel like I'm missing something," he said aloud, almost to himself. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I stood behind him in the doorway, watching him flip through the pages, muttering to himself as though the answers he sought were just beyond his grasp. It was the perfect evidence that the hidden truths were leaving a mark, forcing him to process things he had ignored for months. The unseen impact extended beyond Mark, too. I began noticing subtle shifts in myself. My confidence, quiet but steady, grew with every small change I observed in him. There was an empowerment in seeing the patterns of neglect and inattentiveness I had endured beginning to unravel, not through confrontation, but through the inevitable consequences of being seen, of being documented, of being acknowledged indirectly. I realized that the gift's power was not in shocking him immediately, but in allowing the truth to seep into our lives unnoticed, yet undeniable. A minor yet significant moment occurred one afternoon while I was washing dishes. Mark entered the kitchen, glanced at the counter, and asked, "Angel, have you noticed anything weird lately?" His voice was hesitant, tinged with worry. I looked up and gave him a measured smile, silently acknowledging his growing awareness without giving anything away. "Weird how?" I asked casually, as though the question was trivial. The tension in his posture was palpable. That small, fleeting interaction carried more weight than a confrontation ever could. The impact of what I had hidden was real, quietly reshaping the dynamics of our relationship. Even the most ordinary household moments became charged with subtle tension. He started lingering over conversations, pausing before responding as though measuring the implications of his words. I noticed him replaying arguments in his mind, occasionally muttering fragments of things he had said months ago. Each pause, each hesitant glance, reminded me that the gift had initiated a slow, almost surgical process of awareness. I hadn't needed to say anything. The truths themselves were doing the work. There was also a small, unexpected consequence involving our pet dog, Max. He would often bark or scratch at the trash bin where the gift had been discarded. At first, I thought it was coincidental, but over time it felt symbolic. A living reminder of the hidden truths lurking just beneath the surface. Max's restless energy mirrored the tension that had begun to permeate our household, making the unseen impact feel even more alive, more tangible. One evening, a minor argument erupted over something trivial, a misplaced coffee mug, a forgotten appointment. But the fight didn't follow its usual pattern. Mark's words carried hesitation, a hint of uncertainty, as though he was testing the waters of his own understanding. I responded calmly, letting him feel the consequences of his confusion without escalating. The emotional weight of the gift's contents had infiltrated even our smallest disagreements, subtly shifting the balance of our interactions. Another small incident reinforced the unseen impact when Mark attempted to fix something he normally would have ignored. He spent an entire afternoon reorganizing the living room, aligning books, dusting surfaces, and even moving furniture slightly. When I commented on it lightly, he shrugged with a forced casualness. "Just trying to get things right," he muttered. The irony wasn't lost on me. The discarded gift had quietly pushed him to reflect, to reconsider, and to act in ways he never had before. I also began noticing the psychological strain on him. He started waking earlier, sitting at the kitchen table long before I joined him, sipping coffee silently, lost in thought. I could see the weight of unrecognized truths pressing on his mind, creating small cracks in the self-assurance he had always carried so confidently. Each sigh, each pause, each absent-minded gesture reminded me that the hidden contents of the gift had started to reshape not just behavior, but internal awareness. A brief, almost mundane moment one afternoon captured the depth of this unseen impact. Mark found an old receipt from months ago, something he would normally discard without thought. He stared at it, frowned, and muttered, "Why didn't I?" The unfinished sentence lingered in the air, unspoken, a subtle acknowledgement that he was beginning to see patterns he had previously ignored. That small act, seemingly insignificant, carried more weight than any argument or confrontation ever could. Even our conversation started to change. He became more careful, measured, and tentative. Questions that had once been casual or dismissive were now asked with an underlying tension, a subconscious recognition that his actions had consequences beyond the immediate moment. I observed him silently, noting the slow transformation. The impact was quiet, invisible to anyone else, but for me it was undeniable and deeply satisfying. I also began to realize how my own behavior had shifted in response. I was calmer, more deliberate, and more observant. I no longer felt the immediate need to react with anger or frustration. Instead, I allowed the subtle effects of the hidden truths to play out organically. It was a slow, almost imperceptible form of influence, yet it felt profoundly powerful. One particularly revealing moment came when Mark accidentally stumbled upon a small part of the gift while searching for a pen in the trash. He paused, glanced around, and then quickly turned away, pretending nothing had happened. His hesitation, the flicker of recognition in his eyes, told me more than words ever could. The unseen impact was working exactly as I had hoped, planting seeds of awareness, curiosity, and subtle anxiety, without me needing to intervene. By the end of the week, the cumulative effect of these small incidents was undeniable. The apartment felt different, charged with a quiet tension that neither of us could fully articulate. Mark moved through our home differently, spoke differently, and even thought differently. And I too had shifted. My awareness of his growing unease gave me a sense of empowerment I hadn't felt in years. The gift, though discarded, had already reshaped the emotional landscape of our lives. It struck me that the true power of the hidden truths wasn't in the moment of discovery alone. It was in their unseen impact, the slow, relentless infiltration of awareness into his daily habits, his thoughts, and his interactions. Each subtle shift, each hesitant glance, each pause in conversation reinforced the message I had encoded in that simple package. I had been here all along, quietly observing, recording, and ensuring that my feelings, my experiences, and my perspective could no longer be ignored. And as I watched him from the hallway, arranging books with meticulous care, pausing mid-step as though calculating his next move, I felt a quiet, almost meditative satisfaction. The unseen impact was real, potent, and entirely in motion, shaping the next stage of our lives in ways neither of us could yet fully comprehend. It happened on a rainy Tuesday evening, when the hum of the downpour against our windows seemed to mirror the tension that had been quietly simmering in our home for days. I had just finished preparing a simple dinner, the aroma of roasted vegetables and garlic filling the kitchen, when I heard Mark mutter something under his breath in the living room. His voice was low, hesitant, and carried a note of frustration I hadn't heard before. I wiped my hands on a towel and stepped into the living room, my heart beating faster than usual. He was holding the small trash bin where the gift had been discarded, turning it slowly in his hands, as though examining it for the first time. There was a flicker of something in his eyes, confusion, disbelief, and perhaps the first trace of guilt. "Angel, what is this?" he asked, his voice almost cracking. I stayed silent, letting him look at me, letting the moment stretch. He had no idea that the gift contained the culmination of months of unnoticed emotions, recorded thoughts, and small evidences of his carelessness. He had thrown it away casually, and now he was holding it in his hands like a puzzle he couldn't solve. The sight of him standing there, small and uncertain, made a strange mix of satisfaction and apprehension swirl in my chest. I didn't even know what I was tossing, he admitted finally, his voice quieter now. He sounded vulnerable, unsteady, a side of him I had rarely seen in 12 years of marriage. I could see the realization dawning slowly on him, like sunlight piercing through a thick cloud. I thought it was just nothing. It was never nothing, Mark, I said, my voice calm but firm. I didn't raise it, didn't let anger seep in because I wanted every word to carry weight without aggression. Everything inside that gift, every letter, every note, every little thing. It's my truth. It's the reality you've ignored for months. He sank onto the couch, cradling the bin in his lap. I don't understand, he murmured. He was clearly overwhelmed, and a part of me felt a pang of sympathy, but another part was alive with anticipation. Finally, he was confronted with the depth of what he had dismissed. I knelt beside him, placing a gentle hand on his arm. Do you want to see it? I asked softly, letting the invitation hang in the room. His eyes flickered with hesitation. For a long moment, he seemed to be measuring whether he could face the reality he had so carelessly ignored. Finally, he nodded. Yes. I need to see. I reached into the trash bin and carefully pulled out the gift, brushing away the corner that had slightly crumpled from the discard. Slowly, I opened it in front of him. The letters fell into his lap, neatly folded and waiting. The recorder and photographs, hidden beneath the tissue, were revealed next. His breath caught audibly, and I could see the tension ripple through his shoulders. He picked up the first letter, trembling slightly. Angel, these are? He started, unable to finish. His eyes scanned the neatly written pages, reading aloud fragments of my quiet frustrations and observations. You kept all of this? He asked, his voice a mixture of disbelief and dawning guilt. Yes, I said, keeping my tone steady. I kept it because I needed to remember what was real. Because you often don't see me. You don't see what matters. I documented it, not to punish you, but to ensure the truth couldn't be ignored any longer. The room was silent except for the rain tapping against the windows and the occasional shuffle of paper as he continued reading. I could see the way his body stiffened, then slumped, then stiffened again, like a marionette reacting to invisible strings. Each letter he read seemed to peel away layers of his oblivious confidence. The unseen truths I had hidden were finally surfacing, and the impact was immediate, visceral. At one point he paused, looking up at me with wide, vulnerable eyes. I had no idea. I didn't realize. He trailed off, the words catching in his throat. I didn't interrupt. I wanted him to feel the weight of each revelation, to sit in it fully, without my voice diluting the effect. Then he discovered the recorder. His hand shook as he pressed play, and my own voice, calm yet tinged with the raw emotions of the past months, filled the room. I've tried to tell you, but you never listen. My voice echoed softly, recounting the quiet hurt of months when my feelings had been dismissed. He flinched at the sound, a visible shudder passing through him. The recordings were more than documentation. They were an audible mirror, forcing him to confront the consequences of neglect. The photographs followed. He held them in his hands, staring at images he had never thought about. The missed smiles, the overlooked moments, the small gestures that went unnoticed. Each one seemed to anchor him in the reality he had so often ignored. I can't believe I didn't see any of this, he whispered. I could hear the tremor in his voice, the first hints of regret that were not performative, not defensive but genuine. A minor incident during this confrontation added an unexpected layer. Max, our dog, padded softly into the living room and nudged the gift with his nose, as though sensing the tension. Mark looked down at him, then back at the contents of the gift, and for a moment, his shoulders sagged completely. Even Max seemed to understand the gravity of the situation, circling the couch slowly before resting at Mark's feet. The conversation, or rather the confrontation, continued without interruptions. Mark asked questions haltingly, cautiously. Angel, did you really feel all of this? He asked. I nodded. Yes, I did. Every single moment. And I tried to tell you. I waited. I hoped you would notice. But you didn't. And now you're finally seeing it. He leaned back, exhausted, his eyes fixed on the ceiling. I can't even imagine how long this took for you to put together. His voice was filled with awe, disbelief, and a hint of shame. I remained quiet, letting the moment linger. The power of this confrontation wasn't in my words, but in the accumulation of months of hidden truths laid bare in an intimate, undeniable way. Then came the emotional twist I hadn't fully anticipated. He started to cry. Quietly, almost silently, he let himself feel the weight of what had been overlooked. I felt a flicker of empathy, but I also felt the satisfaction of knowing the truth was finally recognized. This was not about punishment, it was about acknowledgement. His shock, his vulnerability, and his quiet remorse were all signs that the gift had served its purpose. A minor yet meaningful incident followed. Mark picked up one of the letters and traced the lines with his finger, almost reverently. I don't know what to say," he murmured. I said nothing, just watched as he absorbed the gravity of months of unnoticed emotions. Each word he read, each moment he replayed in his mind, seemed to strip away layers of his previous obliviousness, replacing it with awareness, reflection, and the beginnings of accountability. We spoke for hours that night, not in the angry shouting way that often defined our arguments, but in a quiet, raw, and emotionally charged dialogue. Mark admitted his oversights, explained his thoughtlessness, not as an excuse but as a confession. I shared my feelings, my pain, my hope that he could truly understand the consequences of ignoring someone's emotions over time. Each exchange was deliberate, careful, and intense, a slow unraveling of the walls we had built between us. At one point he said something I never expected. "Angel, I've never felt so small and seen at the same time." I understood immediately. Small because he realized the depth of his mistakes, seen because he could no longer deny my perspective. That balance, the simultaneous vulnerability and recognition, was precisely the effect I had wanted, the purpose behind the hidden truths. By the time the rain had stopped, and the room smelled faintly of roasted vegetables and wet earth, we had reached a strange kind of equilibrium. The confrontation wasn't a victory or a defeat, it was a reckoning. He had been forced to see, to process, and to face realities he had ignored. I had allowed him that confrontation not through shouting, not through anger, but through quiet preparation, meticulous documentation, and patience. Even minor gestures now carried weight. When he offered to help clear the table, his movements were careful, almost tentative, as though he was trying to navigate the fragile balance we had just established. When he glanced at me, there was a new layer of respect in his eyes, mingled with remorse, understanding, and the faintest trace of awe. By the end of the night, I realized that the confrontation had been far more than a simple revelation. It had shifted the emotional balance in our home, reshaped our understanding of each other, and demonstrated that even small, overlooked moments could carry immense weight when acknowledged properly. The gift, the hidden truths, and the careful orchestration of their revelation had achieved something I hadn't thought possible: true emotional recognition. The next morning the apartment felt different. There was no shouting, no lingering tension from last night's confrontation, just the quiet aftermath of truths that had finally been faced. I moved through our space with a strange lightness, as though the air itself had shifted. Every detail, the sunlight spilling across the kitchen counter, the faint scent of coffee, the soft rustle of Max settling into his bed, felt sharper, more real. It wasn't just a new day. It was the first moment I felt truly untethered from the weight I had carried for months. I decided it was time to take a step for myself, not for Mark, not even for the sake of the confrontation. I needed to reclaim space for my own strength, a reminder that my resilience wasn't dependent on his acknowledgement or regret. I made a list of small things I had postponed for too long, things that had nothing to do with him. A walk in the park, a visit to the local bookstore, even reorganizing the small collection of journals I kept tucked away in a drawer. It was a quiet form of rebellion, a way of asserting my independence without confrontation. Mark noticed the shift immediately. He attempted to engage with me, offering small gestures. "Do you want me to make breakfast?" Or, "Can I walk Max with you today?" And I realized something profound. My presence, my autonomy, had suddenly become noticeable. In the past, I had blended into the background, my contributions overlooked, my voice muted. Now he paused before speaking, choosing his words carefully, measuring them against a reality he was still adjusting to. And I understood in that moment. Walking away with strength didn't always mean leaving physically. Sometimes it meant standing firmly in your own life, allowing the impact of truth to shape your interactions. The first test of my newfound strength came midweek. A small disagreement arose over something trivial. Mark had left the blinds half open, letting the morning sun pour harshly across the bedroom. In the past, I would have snapped, lost in frustration, my voice rising with irritation. But this time I paused. I took a deep breath and calmly suggested, "Could you adjust the blinds, please?" The tone was gentle, firm, and deliberate. For the first time, I felt the weight of self-possession. My words were respected, not ignored, and I realized that strength wasn't loud or reactive. It was deliberate, composed, and grounded in self-respect. Walking away with strength also meant reclaiming my social life. I reached out to an old friend, someone I had drifted from because I spent too much time accommodating Mark's routines. We met at a small cafe, the kind with worn wooden tables and the faint smell of baked pastries. Talking to her, laughing freely, sharing unfiltered thoughts without worrying about judgment or interruption, it was liberating. For the first time in months, I felt the quiet thrill of being fully present, fully heard, and fully myself. The experience reminded me that strength wasn't merely surviving in a relationship. It was thriving independently, even when tethered to shared history. Small, symbolic acts reinforced my sense of empowerment. I reorganized my journal collection, placing the letters I had hidden inside the gift at the top of a shelf I could see every day. They were a reminder of my journey, from silence and frustration to clarity and assertive expression. I felt a quiet pride in knowing that I had transformed months of pain into something tangible, something that affirmed my worth and resilience. Every folded page, every recorded memory, was now a beacon of my personal growth. Mark's reactions to my newfound confidence were subtle but undeniable. One evening, he approached me cautiously while I was rearranging the living room, holding a cup of tea. "Angel, I just wanted to say thank you," he said, his voice hesitant but sincere. "For everything, for showing me how I've been unaware. I see it now." I nodded, accepting the acknowledgement without seeking more. It wasn't about praise, it was about recognition and balance. The gift had done its work, and now the equilibrium was being restored subtly and deliberately. A minor yet poignant moment occurred when Max, sensing the change in the household, became more affectionate toward me. He would rest his head on my lap during quiet mornings, nuzzle my hand, and follow me around with a lightness that mirrored my own. Even the small rhythms of daily life carried reminders of the strength I had cultivated, quiet affirmations that resilience wasn't just emotional, but lived and experienced in every interaction. I decided to take a long walk that evening, letting the fading light of the day wash over me. The streets were quiet, familiar, but different somehow. I noticed the small details, the rustle of leaves underfoot, the distant laughter of children, the soft chirping of birds returning home. With every step, I felt the weight of past frustrations dissolve, replaced by a sense of grounded clarity. Walking away with strength didn't mean leaving the relationship entirely. It meant reclaiming my emotional autonomy, asserting my value, and navigating our shared life with confidence and self-respect. I also began investing more in personal hobbies I had neglected: painting, reading, and even volunteering at a local community center. Each activity reinforced my sense of agency. I realized that walking away with strength was not a singular act but a cumulative practice. Small choices made consistently to prioritize my well-being, assert my voice, and cultivate resilience. Even minor achievements like finishing a painting or organizing a small neighborhood event became symbols of empowerment, tangible evidence that I was reclaiming my life on my own terms. Mark noticed these changes. One evening, as I returned from a volunteering shift, he looked at me with a mix of admiration and unease. "You've changed," he said softly. "You're different. Stronger." I nodded, letting him witness the growth without making it about him. It wasn't for his validation. The shift was mine. I had walked through the storm of hidden truths, confrontation, and emotional upheaval, and I emerged with a quiet, undeniable strength. Even minor daily interactions became arenas to exercise this strength. When a neighbor dropped by unexpectedly, I greeted them warmly, handled their questions confidently, and maintained composure even when Mark fidgeted nervously beside me. The unseen ripples of my internal transformation were visible in these moments. I was no longer reactive, no longer overshadowed. I was centered, poised, and unapologetically present in my own life. A particularly striking moment came one Sunday morning. I sat on the porch with a cup of tea, watching the sun rise over the quiet neighborhood. Mark joined me, offering a simple smile. We didn't speak at first, letting the silence be comfortable, filled with mutual acknowledgement rather than tension. In that stillness, I felt the culmination of all the subtle shifts, the confrontation, the unseen impact, and the quiet reclamation of agency. Walking away with strength wasn't about leaving. It was about being fully present for myself, anchored in my worth, and navigating life with clarity and dignity. Even a minor incident in the kitchen reinforced my transformation. Mark accidentally spilled some juice, and rather than reacting with frustration, I calmly handed him a towel and helped him clean it up. "It's okay," I said softly. "Accidents happen." In the past, such moments might have triggered irritation or resentment. Now they became opportunities to reinforce calmness, patience, and measured strength, demonstrating the quiet authority I had gained over my own reactions. Over the next few days, the subtle rhythm of our home continued to evolve. Mark began leaving me small notes of appreciation, gestures that previously would have seemed awkward or unnecessary. He paused before speaking, measured his words, and even asked for my advice on matters he would have ignored before. These minor incidents were proof that walking away with strength didn't require grand gestures. It required consistent presence, awareness, and the quiet assertion of self-worth. I also began journaling more deliberately, documenting my reflections, my victories, and the nuances of my personal growth. Each entry reinforced the journey from frustration and invisibility to recognition and empowerment. The act of recording these moments became another layer of strength, reminding me daily that my life, my emotions, and my efforts were valid, meaningful, and impactful. By the end of the week, I realized that walking away with strength was not an endpoint but an ongoing practice. It wasn't about leaving Mark or our shared life. It was about walking forward with clarity, dignity, and the unwavering awareness of my own value. Each small act, each deliberate choice, each conscious pause reinforced a sense of self that had been quieted for too long. And in that quiet evening, as I watched the sunset spill golden light across our living room, I understood fully. Strength isn't loud or reactive. It's deliberate, steady, and profoundly personal. I had walked through confrontation, revelation, and unseen consequences, and emerged not only empowered but transformed. The gift, the hidden truths, and the emotional journey had led me to this moment of clarity. I breathed deeply, feeling the steady beat of my own heart, the soft rise and fall of my chest, and the quiet hum of life around me. Walking away with strength didn't mean abandoning connection. It meant embracing my own power, asserting my worth, and living with intentionality. And in that serene, luminous moment, I finally felt entirely, authentically free.